of why real estate investing. You always hear people, you got to invest in real estate. Real estate is the path to wealth. And nobody really tells you why or how that works. But let me just share with you why and remind you why investing in real estate is, to be honest with you, I almost consider it mandatory if you plan on retiring. Remember, 97% of doctors cannot retire at age 65 and live the same lifestyle. And remember, only 1% of the population makes $1 million, has a net worth of $1 million exchanging time for money. In other words, going to work. So that's the worst way you can make money, but that's what most people do, and that's typically all that most people do. So it's a very limiting way. It's a good way to have a good lifestyle. You can work as a chiropractor and have a nice house and a nice car and nice vacations and all that. But that alone will not create wealth. And then remember, leveraging money, 14% of the population gets wealthy leveraging money, and 85% leveraging time. So the real combination that you focus on is leveraging time and money. That's 99% of wealth is learning how to leverage time and money. And so this is why real estate is, let me just cover some of the main points, why real estate has created over 70% of the millionaires. Now, the opposite of that statistic is if you do not invest in real estate, you have less than a 30% chance of having a net worth over $1 million. So, and remember, when people pass away, what's the only typical equity or assets that they have? It's in their home, because it was forced equity. It's what I call forced discipline, because most people will never invest. They don't. It's a discipline issue. It's not a money issue. But they're forced to invest every time they make a payment on their house. And that's why typically when they die, that's the only equity anybody has, are assets to their name. So having said that, there's 6 major advantages to investing in real estate. The first big advantage is anytime you do an investment, you always look at what's the likelihood of a purchase. So remember, real estate is a survival purchase. So when you look at all products and services and you relate them to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, remember it's the survival categories that people have to spend money on. So people have to spend money on food. They have to spend money on shelter. They have to spend money on security. So those are the primary needs. The physiological needs first, and then security second. And those are the pain-based motivators. And that starts out why. The second reason is it's a monthly purchase. It's not a one-off purchase. So you could get into an investment that deals with pleasure versus pain, and that investment could go away real quickly because it's not a high motivator. Like say you invest in stocks that deal with luxury boats. Well, that's not a primary motivator, and so people will give that up real quick, unlike their home. So number one, it's a primary motivator purchase. Number two, it's a monthly purchase. And number three, it's typically the largest purchase every month. That's why real estate investing now is a major category. Now, the next 6 categories I'm going to go into is why it's so advantageous in the United States. Now, remember, every country has different laws, so this would not necessarily apply to every country. But American laws are geared toward housing. And the reason is housing essentially is what is the bottom line that grows the economy, that creates jobs. You build a house, that creates a lot of peripheral jobs, not just a house alone, but carpet and, the amenities you fill a house with, and then, what's carpet made out of? There's petroleum products and there's, synthetic products. And so the trickle-down effect from a house is phenomenal. than the amount of jobs in the economy. And that's why the United States has geared these laws toward real estate to make it really advantageous. So here's the 6 categories. Number 1 is leverage. So again, the more knowledge you have, the less leverage it takes. As an example, I got friends that buy real estate and they pay 100% cash for the real estate. Well, they just totally nixed one of the most important reasons of real estate, which is leverage. So as an example, if he bought a $200,000 house and he paid cash, he tied up $200,000, where he could have bought the same house maybe with only $10,000 down, and he could have done that 20 times. So instead of owning a $200,000 asset, he could own a $2 million asset. Or let's see, 20 times, if you had two $200,000 homes and you bought 20 of them, that'd be $2 million. So see, you could control a $2 million asset with $10,000 down on a $200,000 unit, buying 20 units, as opposed to buying one $200,000 unit. So that's also why you never want equity to accumulate in your real estate, because number one, it's dead money. It's not working for you. So as your equity increases in your real estate, it's good to take it out and reinvest it. But most people, they take it out, but they don't invest it. They buy what's called depreciating monthly liabilities. In other words, they'll buy things that are worthless, the next day, and typically they have to make a payment on it every month, like a car. So that's why people essentially stay broke. I always say the big difference between wealth and poverty is not your income. The difference is how much of that income you buy with tax-deductible appreciating assets that accrue monthly versus non-taxable depreciating liabilities with monthly payments. That's essentially the difference between wealth and being broke. And the same people making the same income, if they just spent differently, one will get rich buying one way and one will stay broke buying the other way. So again, everything you purchase, you want to try to go, okay, how can we make this tax deductible? Number one. Number two, is it an appreciating asset versus a depreciating liability? And when you can do the juxtaposition and go, well, what if it's not taxable? Deductible just costs you 50% more. If you're in a 50% tax bracket, you will be if you're a chiropractor. So already it costs you 50% more. And then if it's appreciating, the very next month it's worth something, versus if it's a depreciating, the next month it's worth less. And then are there monthly dividends that you make from it? Does it continue to grow every month? Or do you have to make payments on the liability every month? And that's typically through credit cards, things like that. And that's literally the difference. It's not money, it's how you spend the money. So having said that, when you look at real estate, and again, I always say you can buy bad real estate. People think, just because it's real estate, you get all kinds of people jumping into real estate just because they, heard you can get wealthy buying real estate. And they typically don't even know why. And then they buy bad real estate because they don't know real estate. And I'd say 80% of the investors that call themselves investors aren't investors at all. They're speculators because they don't understand that the difference between good and bad real estate. I say it all the time. You can buy good gold and you can buy bad gold. You can buy good diamonds and you can buy bad diamonds. And just real estate's no different. You can buy good real estate or you can buy bad real estate. So you have to learn the industry. That's what this is about. So when we go into 6 major advantages, so it already has natural inherent advantages from a consumer standpoint, and that it's the first thing people will have to buy. And they'll have to rent shelter. Okay. It's a large payment. It's typically the largest payment, and it's a monthly payment. So that's a good place to start. And then let's go into these categories. Leverage. So if you're not even very good at buying real estate, like now you can buy a home, you could put 3 or 5% down and buy a home if you're going to live in it. Well, that's a lot of leverage. So you can own a $200,000, $300,000, $100,000 property for, $5,000 or something like that. So that's huge leverage. You can't do that. See, all these other investments, you can't do that. If you wanted to own $100,000 in stocks, you had to come up with $100,000. And the reason that gets to be so difficult is $100,000. Well, if you're in a chiropractic office, you had to make $400,000 to do that at a 50% overhead. So you had to make $400,000 at a 50% overhead to have $200,000. And then you were taxed at 50% on that $200,000 to have $100,000 to take that $100,000 and buy $100,000 in stocks. That's why it is so difficult to leverage money. Okay, so when we talk about leverage on real estate, again, one of the key advantages is how little you can put down to own that asset. Now, what's so important is that asset be what's called demand real estate. In other words, if people don't want it, they're not going to rent it. And then you got bad real estate. That's why it's so important that you only involve yourself with what is called demand real estate, or you'll end up with a bad situation. And it's so important that it cash flows. So it's important that we understand how to not only buy demand real estate, but how to evaluate whether it's going to cash flow or not. But once you have demand real estate that cash flows and you put a little bit down, that's huge leverage. I mean, I just had a client, he put $20,000 down. He took a property out of foreclosure and he learned it through our real estate program. So he took a property out of foreclosure, $20,000 down. The property's worth $350,000 and it cash flows $1,000 a month. Now, that's cash flow, $1,000. And again, the great thing about being a chiropractor is you don't need cash flow because you're a chiropractor. You're working. You don't need the money. But you always want to make sure it cash flows. Always. You never buy real estate that does not cash flow. So in that one transaction, he spent $20,000 for a $350,000 asset to control. And so that's somebody else that's going to be paying that asset. So his net worth essentially just went up $350,000 from just a few days of knowing how to do something. And again, if he was going to have $350,000 cash on hand, how much money would he have had to have made in his chiropractic office? Well, 350 times 2 is 7. That's $1.4 million. He would have had to made $1.4 million at a 50% overhead to have $700,000. At 50% taxes to have $350,000. See, so the difference was $1.4 million. And how long would it take for him to make $1.4 million versus $20,000? So leverage is unbelievably phenomenal. And the second reason you never want to leave your, people think there's security in paying their home off. And that's not true at all. That's when you become a target. Anytime there's a lawsuit, the first thing they'll do is the attorneys will go online in the public records. One of the first things they'll look at is your house. And they'll just look at the mortgage, how much the mortgage was for, when did you take it out, and they can estimate. And then they can look at your home and get the value of your home, and they can estimate how much equity is in your home. And that tells them whether or not they're going to sue you. So that's another reason you never want to leave a large amounts of equity in your home, or you don't want to pay it off because now you're a huge target. So it's bad leverage. You could take $50,000 out of your home and buy 2 or 3 properties worth, $2, $4, $6, $8 million versus leaving that $50,000 equity in your home. And now you're not a target when that equity is not there. So that leverage is unbelievably important. And again, I've bought several homes with no money down. You've heard those commercials on TV. Well, it's true. And then it's kind of hard to believe until you actually do it, how it works. We teach how it works, but I've had several people just give me their homes, cash flowing, good homes. They just needed to get out. So they essentially, what they did is they just turned over $100,000, $200,000 asset to me is what they essentially did. So now that doesn't come along, regularly or very often, but it definitely happens. And then, but you can easily pick up properties for $5, $10, or $15,000 that's worth $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. That's pretty easy to do when you know what you're doing. And I always say, if you don't know anything about real estate and you just went to commercial rates, it's very easy to get loans when you put 30% down into a piece of property. So if you had $100,000, you wouldn't even have to know, much of anything about negotiating, but you'd still want to buy demand real estate. It would always be stupid to not buy demand real estate. But if you have $100,000 and you didn't even know, you at least knew demand real estate and cash flow, and you didn't know negotiations or anything else, and you went through a bank and you got a bank loan, you could easily triple your net worth. You could easily buy if you had 100, you could easily buy a $300,000 cash flow property. So now you have a $300,000 asset instead of $100,000. And that's if you're ignorant. If you're just totally ignorant, you can triple your net worth. That's why so many times when I'll hear doctors, they'll say, I've got $50,000 in the bank or $100,000 cash on hand. I'm like, oh my God, do you know what you could do with that with real estate? I mean, $100,000 when you know what you're doing, that's easily $1 million in cash flowing asset instead of $100,000. So leverage is huge. The great news about what we teach is it doesn't cost a whole lot of money. We don't take out bank loans. We leave the notes in place. And essentially, we just buy the home with a little bit of equity. So it might only be $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to pick up a home with no mortgage, cash flowing, good property. So, okay, next one's appreciation. So obviously, and by the way, appreciation is the least of the 6 reasons why you would buy real estate. When people don't know real estate, they think it's the number 1 reason you buy real estate, and it's not. It's the least most important reason you'll buy real estate. But if you buy demand real estate, you'll always be at the front edge of appreciation if it's demand real estate. And then there's equity. Well, every month, my property owners are paying money into my retirement account. I kind of think of real estate as individual retirement accounts. Each piece of real estate, I just kind of think of it as a mini retirement account. And every month, I have my renters paying into my properties. And it doesn't matter where I'm at. If I'm scuba diving down in the Grand Caymans, it doesn't matter. They're paying into my retirement account. So my net worth is increasing every month, regardless of what I'm doing. And then the fourth one is depreciation. And this gets to be very important when you retire, depreciation. And a lot of people don't understand what that is, but basically you take the cost of, and this is all has to do with American laws. American laws are what allow all these things to happen. So depreciation is a law, and essentially what it says is you can take a residential property and you can depreciate over 27 and a half years. So what does that mean? Well, an example is, let's say you have a home that's worth X amount of money and you divide that into 27 and a half years. Let's say that comes out to $5,000 a year. Let's say depreciation is $5,000 a year over 27 and a half years, okay? Well, how does that relate to you? And why is that so important? Why is that depreciation so? Well, here's why. The bottom line is I have friends that the depreciation allows them to not pay any taxes at all. So they make a 6-figure income with their investments and their earned income, and it's offset by the depreciation. So they don't pay legally, they don't pay any taxes at all because of depreciation. So here's how that works. So let's say your depreciation was $5,000 a year. Well, that's how much money of earned income you do not have to pay taxes on. So that's $5,000. So how much is that in real money to a chiropractor? So $5,000. Well, it's $20,000. You had to make $20,000 on your own in your office at 50% overhead to have $10,000, 50% of taxes to have $5,000. So for every unit of $5,000 of depreciation, that's $20,000 of earned income, basically money that you had to go out and make. That's not taxed at all. Now it's $5,000 in earned income, but in total money you had to make because you're self-employed, it's $20,000. Well, 5 homes is $100,000. So that's $100,000 that you do not have to make if you just own 5 homes and the depreciation's $5,000 a year. See, that's why I have friends that's exactly what happens is they have enough homes that it offsets their earned income and makes it zero, and that's how it works. Now that gets to be really important when you retire, when you're 65 or older. That becomes a major issue that you don't have to pay taxes. When you're earlier and when you're making a certain amount of money, then that won't apply. If you're making a lot of money, that won't apply to you. But when you don't make as much money, like when you're in retirement or semi-retirement, then that definitely becomes very valuable. Next is capital gains. When you do cash flow, it's taxed at the capital gains rate. So it's not taxed at earned income rate. So capital gains rates change depending on the administration. It always fluctuates and goes up and down a little bit, but it's always less than earned income. So you'll pay as much as 50% of taxes on earned income, and capital gains can be as little as 20%. So obviously, if your money's coming in from capital gains, you need a lot less money to have the same effect. You need a lot less resources for money if it's capital gains versus earned income. So I can have half or 1/3 of the resources of revenue and make the same amount of money as earned income. And then number 6 is cash flow. And remember, you never buy property that cash flows. Number one, you shouldn't need the cash flow if you're a working chiropractor. That's what's so great about investing. When you're a white-collar professional, you should have some disposable income. And you don't need the money. And that creates a tremendous advantage in the market, especially with competition and real estate investors that live off their income. So they have to have much sweeter deals. Well, if you're a chiropractor and you have earned income and you don't need the money, I mean, I never, ever needed my cash flow, ever. Now, it's nice to have it. It's nice for it to be there, but I never, ever needed it. Okay, so cash flow becomes important. And again, these are things that become even way more important when you're 65 or older. These are things you pay a lot of attention to, not as much. But that's the great advantage, again, when you're practicing, is you don't need cash flow. So the cash flow that is there, and we recommend at least a $250 a month cash flow for property. That's after all the expenses are made, taxes, maintenance, insurance, management fee, mortgage, everything. A minimum of $250. And then we just recommend you put the money back into the property to knock down the principal every month, because if you pay that $250 back into the principal, it significantly shortens the life of that loan up to 40%. You can decrease the loan up to 40% pretty easy by paying a principal payment every month in addition to the mortgage and interest payment. And that's one of the strategies to significantly increase the equity of a property. And then also to take the equity and leverage it off. As it builds up, leverage it off. After you save $250 over X amount of time and you end up with $5,000, $10,000, well, you don't want it sitting there, because you can buy another property for $10,000. You can buy another $100,000, $200,000 asset for $10,000. This is what it's about. It's all about leveraging time and money. So chiropractic is, it's a great profession. It'll give you a good lifestyle. You can live in a nice house, nice car. And what's the disadvantages? Well, the number one disadvantage is you're limited in your income that you can make on your own. You only have so much time and energy. So your earned income potential is very limited practicing. That's why only 1% of millionaires become millionaires practicing. And then the second category is time. You know that it's very, very difficult to take time off in a chiropractic office. I mean, it's unfortunately, I see so many chiropractors that are in their 50s and 60s, and they've never taken much of any type of vacation time because they couldn't. For number one, it hurts the practice. Number two, there's probably not a vacation you could take that would cost more than the money you would lose by not being in your practice. And those are the two most common reasons that chiropractors rarely take vacations. And so they're stuck. They're absolutely stuck in their office. And it's a terrible feeling. So that's the power of real estate, is real estate creates leverage of wealth, passive income. It creates security. I always say that I was way more secure when I started having associate doctors. That helped create a lot of security because it wasn't just on me, those additional sources of income. And I had freedom. But still, that's not high security. Associate doctors come and go. They'll do what they want to do. They'll quit on you in a second if they want to. But real estate, that's a tremendous amount of security. And so, when I started having properties, significant amount of properties, that the passive income paid more than my fixed expenses. To be quite honest with you, I didn't really care what happened to the chiropractic profession and whether the insurance company decreased their payment or what. All the things that chiropractors complain about. It wasn't a complaint with me at all. I didn't care because I was no longer dependent on this fluctuating healthcare market and what an insurance company is willing to pay or not. The stress level was unbelievably relieved once you start picking up properties. And now not your whole weight of your survival is that practice. So the quality of life exponentially increases. Stress level decreases. Security increases. Your time off increases. It's just unbelievable. But that's the key, is build a good practice, number one. Make good income, number one. Number two is learn how to take those systems and leverage it into associate doctors. Because remember, the associate doctor is the easiest form of passive income that you could make. And let me just make a comment about that right now, because it's so important. It's like the 1, 2, 3 steps. First, learn to maximize your money. Okay. Number two is take those systems and learn how to replicate them through associate doctors. Number three is take the money you make from the associate doctors and leverage it into real estate. That's why I say one associate doctor seeing only 80 visits a week at a $50 per visit, and this is if you split it 50-50, you would make a little over $100,000 a year from that associate doctor. If you took that $100,000, and if you were absolutely stupid, you could increase your asset threefold. In other words, put a third down, take out a mortgage, and that's like the stupid way of doing it. So one associate doctor is easily worth $300,000 a year if you're stupid. But if you know what you're doing, one associate doctor at $100,000 a year, you can leverage that in real estate 10 to 1. 10 to 1, not 3 to 1. And that's how one associate doctor seeing 80 visits a week to me, is worth $1 million a year, not $100,000 a year. And that's exactly what we teach. That's what creates wealth and freedom. And that's exactly what I did to retire at age 33, a multimillionaire, and have freedom to travel the world. So, having said that, let's go ahead and get started. Let me point out one other little thing, and this just happened recently. And I see so many doctors are afraid to take on associate doctors. They have a psychological block. That for some reason they think it's going to cost them $100,000 and they don't have $100,000. Well, if that's how you think, you're never going to have an associate doctor. Just get used to working the rest of your life, okay? Because that's the reality. But the reality is when you know how to hire, pick, and train associate doctors, they pay for themselves real quick. You got to remember, typically we'll start an associate doctor at a base salary of, say, $3,000 plus we put all the emphasis on the bonus, the upside. We don't want to just give them a big check and make them fat and happy and just sit there and do nothing. So we give them enough money to pay for their basic expenses, and then we give them a good percentage of the upside. That's for motivational purposes. But then we train them hard. The first month we'll teach educational sales, so they'll know how to get new patients. The second month, they have to learn patient education. So within 60 days, they know how to get and keep new patients. And you got to remember, it only takes 13 visits at a $50 per visit to pay a base salary of $3,000 a month. And so the only responsibility you have is for that associate doctor's first 13 visits. That's it. You're off the hook. There's no more money coming out of your pocket. It's not $100,000. Typically, it's only $3,000 to $6,000. It's 1 to 2 months, no more than 3 months salary. And that's if they didn't collect anything in 3 months, it'd be $9,000. And that's not even realistic because they're going to be seeing some patients and collecting some money in those first 3 months. So it'll be offset at least 50%. So in real money, you're only going to be spending about $6,000 total for the associate doctor. Now, once it goes past 13 visits a month, it's on him now. It's not on you. You've already broken even. The only thing I care about is the break even, so there's no more money out of my pocket. That's the only thing I care about. Once he goes past 13 visits, it's all on him now, not me. Now, his motivation, his focus will determine his quality of life, not me. And so look at the leverage potential. We just had a doctor do this. So you spend only $6,000 to make $100,000 a year. You will not be able to do that in anything legally. For you to make $100,000 a year, how much money you'd have to make at a 5%, you'd have to make like $8 million. At a 50% overhead to have $4 million, 50% in taxes to have $2 million, and get a 5% return on your investment to make $100,000 a month. So you'd have to have made $8 million on your own. And look at the time and energy and money it would take to make that versus $6,000. That's why you're crazy. You're absolutely insane by not learning how to hire and train and manage associate doctors. Not only is it a phenomenal return on investment, now you have freedom and security. It's the first path to a higher quality of life. And then, of course, when you learn how to take that residual money and leverage it 10 to 1 into real estate, whether he makes you $50,000 or $100,000, whatever, then take that money because you should not need that money at all. The money you're making should easily pay for everything that you're doing, your home, your car, your vacations, everything. That's all disposable income, and you just leverage it 10 to 1. And that's how one associate doctor makes $1 million a year. It's all through knowledge and skill. Knowledge, not by busting your ass. It's by being smart. It's not by going in there and grinding away and seeing more patients. The whole goal is to see less patients and make more money. And you only can do that by leveraging time and money. You cannot do it by just going in there and keep being what I call the widget maker. You're on the assembly line. You'll never get ahead in life. Just going in there and treating patients, and that's it.